Ok. Planen at vi gjør dette arrangementet på engelsk. Vi har videostream I dag med deltakere som forstår best engelsk, så vi har planlagt å gjøre det. Men jeg ønsker velkommen på norsk, hvis det ok. Så velkommen til oss. Mitt navn Bjørn Tore Hoem, jeg jobber I Cloud-avdelingen I IBM. Vi visste det på torsdag I forrige uke, når vi tok en risiko og en sjans på å sende ut en invitasjon med så godt varsel, at det kom til å bli ikke veldig mange deltakere. Så jeg synes jo det at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stykker faktisk over forventning. Så velkommen og tusen takk til dere som kunne stille på så kort varsel. Og som jeg også sa, vi har da live videostream. Vi bruker vårt eget da, denne gangen. Ustream og ikke Facebook Live, så det betyr at det blir antagelig et replay tilgjengelig etter dette, så hvis noen har lyst til å se det en gang til, eller sende det til noen kolleger for at det var bra innhold, så gjør gjerne det. Planen at vi starter ganske umiddelbart, nå klokka 2. Vi har Christian og vi har Douglas som skal holde det faglige innholdet her, og vi planlegger og sikter oss inn på å være ferdig sånn cirka rundt 3:30. Det betyr at vi kommer til å være her etterpå hvis det noen som vil snakke mer eller har spørsmål, men selve arrangementet planen at vi ferdig med cirka 3:30. Det vi skal snakke om I dag Cloud Object Storage, og for de av dere som følger med litt I denne bransjen, så vet dere jo at det en teknologi som har kommet med cloud. I februar så hadde en av de virkelig store aktørene I cloud et lite uheld, et arbeidsuheld, og deres S3 lagringssystemer gikk ned et par timer. Et par uker etterpå så hadde Microsoft et lignende uheld, og hadde en outage som det heter. Det kunne virke som at hele verden gikk ned. Vi fikk en del tilbakemeldinger på Twitter. Amazon goes down, so does my TV remote, my light controller, even my front gate. Yay for 2017. I can't change my mouse sensitivity because servers are down. Det sier litt om hva slags data og kritiske data etter hvert som ligger på denne type lagringsløsninger. Og det åpner litt for dialogen om løsningene robuste nok, om de har de enterprise-kvalitetene som man trenger. Og det leder litt til det vi skal snakke om her I dag, som IBMs løsninger for Cloud Object Storage. Så med det, en liten innledning til deg, Christian, som tar oss igjen den første del.
Mange takk.
Vær så god.
Jeg hedder Christian Lai, and I'm responsible for IBM Cloud Object Storage in the Nordic countries. I'm leading the sales, and Douglas on the side here, he is the technical lead for all the knowledgeable information about the storage solution. So what we're going through today is that I'm going to prepare with an overview, market overview about the storage market in general, and also about the usabilities and the business efforts you can bring to the market by using IBM Cloud Object Storage. Then later on, we will talk about some news. We have provided some new solutions to the market as well during the recent month. And Douglas, he will end up with providing an overview with the technology, but also like a live demo of how the solution actually looked like and how you can use it in your everyday life. So first of all, the reason why Cloud Object Storage and Object Storage is so interesting for customers and for IBM and technology vendors as well, that is because the increase of unstructured content on the market. This unstructured content is being generated by various things. It's first of all in the media industry, we see like from 2K to 4K videos. Companies, they are utilizing more security systems, having video surveillance, taping voice conversations, and all that kind of information. So basically a lot of files. The structured content, which we know as ERP systems and databases, that is of course really important for many people and companies as well. but it's not increasing in the same manner as unstructured content. So how we address this at IBM, that is IBM Cloud Object Storage. And in the past, we used to have other solutions that we monetized in order to be able to speak the object storage language. But what we did after a while was that we went out to the market and looked at the various vendors on the market, and we came across a company called CleverSafe. And 1.5 years ago, IBM acquired CleverSafe, which is now IBM Cloud Object Storage. If we step back a bit, we have various types of storage. We have block storage, file storage, and object storage. And if we compare that to parking a car, then I don't know if you know how you would park a car in block storage. I guess so, but you'll actually split it up in a lot of blocks, and then you would park your car in that manner. File storage, that will be like a parking lot. Drive down row number 5 and then space number 18. That is your spot for your storage for your car. And then with object storage, that is more like valet parking. So you come up with your data, and then you get a ticket, unique ticket, and then the car is actually going to be parked. You don't know exactly where it is, but that also brings the benefit to the technology vendor that it can move the data around, move the car around, where it makes most sense for the vendor and for the customers as well. So what happened around 6 months after IBM acquired CleverSafe, that was actually that Gartner went out and made an analysis of the object storage market technologies, and we came out as number 1. It was called CleverSafe at that time, and then 3 months later we changed the name to IBM Cloud Object Storage. And actually in December last year, IDC, they went out to a similar, made a similar report and similar analysis, and IBM came out as a leader in the top corner. So that is the technology that we're using. So what we did with this technology is that first of all, we are selling that as an on-premise solution, so you can buy it as a hardware and software solution. But we have also migrated this and implemented this in our global cloud around the globe, and it's still in the process of being implemented in our cloud, but we have it in all the regions around the globe. And when we talk about object storage, the similarities about the solution is that you can use it for a lot of stuff. So what I'm prepared is that I'm going through a couple of use cases of examples what you actually can use a storage solution for. If you know the service called Box, where you can share files, we use it at IBM and resell it as well. It's actually IBM Cloud Object Storage that is a storage solution behind the share service. And if you have various offices around in the country, you can also use it for remote site office storage. Then you acquire some hardware, and it will be consolidated in our cloud. Also, content repository. If you have some kind of archive of data, media repository, having a lot of shared files. Typically, if you are a Netflix kind of service, then you have your most popular content in a content delivery network, and then you have all the other content in another storage basket. That could be a solution like this. And then traditional archiving, that is what we see on the market. That is also really big. Taking data out of backup cycles, traditional SharePoint archiving, you name it. And then of course backup. So having this as a backend storage for a backup service. I will come back to what we announced in the news about a new storage tier, which is really cost efficient. And with that tier, we actually see that we're going to do a lot of tape replacement. So it actually has become more cost effective to place your data on a storage device instead of a tape tier. And that goes also for the cloud as well. And then lastly, storage as a service, both internally for customers, but also for service providers. You can apply all these mechanisms as storage as a service. And by the end of Q2 this year, we will provide a service catalog that we will embed into the solution, and so that can be utilized by the customers as well. And what we see here on the top, small icons, that is because this is a really good storage solution, but we need to do business and integrate to a lot of partners here. So that is integration partners. You see, for example, here with the backup, you have NetApp, you have Oracle, Commvault, and so forth. So we are embedding this service into a lot of new applications, and that is where one of the places where we are focusing our research and development, that is doing these integration to a lot of partners. An example of where we're doing business, that is with the University of Chicago. This is the content repository use case. So what they did, that they are doing research within cancer, and they wanted to do collaboration with all of the other universities around the United States. So what they learned was that all the other universities they had storage devices all around. So they need to have some kind of valet parking lot storage solution where they could access everything everywhere. And they choose IBM Cloud Object Storage CleverSafe at that time. And this is actually a private cloud. So they bought the software and they are buying commodity hardware below that. And I have a short video explaining what they're doing.
For the first time, we're able to pull together over 10,000 cancer genomes into a single repository. The potential is to both understand cancer, but it's also to identify new targets for drugs.
They are collecting genomic research from research centers really all over the United States to essentially find a cure for cancer.
Biology is now moving much more into the realm of physics and chemistry in terms of the sheer quantity of data that is available for analysis. The National Cancer Institute's Genomic Data Commons will hold all legacy and all future cancer genomic data and allow us to much more quickly make genomic discoveries in cancer.
Now, instead of being pockets of data, it's one massive repository of data that is expected to scale into the exabyte range.
CleverSafe's ability to scale is absolutely essential. What we are aiming for is very high level availability and a highly scalable solution that can accommodate not just genomics, but eventually other types of data.
We can scale to massive size, we have zero-touch security, and I believe we provide a cost of ownership from a management perspective that's second to none in the industry.
The data is critical, and being able to maintain that, to keep it secure, have it safe, is absolutely essential. The other thing we've really enjoyed with CleverSafe is the remarkable ability of CleverSafe's engineers to develop a solution that works very precisely for our needs. With CleverSafe, we can pick our own hardware, we can go with the cost model that works for us, and we're able to deploy it very quickly.
So that was really a really central use case and a good example of where you can use object storage genomics. So we also see that in the oil and the mining industry as well, having big buckets of unstructured content. In the Nordics, I brought three different use cases of what we're doing. One of them, that is a backup as a service provider. They operate from Denmark, and they are doing backup as a service where they are using Spectrum Protect, and then they are backing the data up directly to IBM Cloud Object Storage. And they have chosen to start with utilizing the cloud, but they are planning to do it on-premise as well. They have large data centers where they have capacity. And they are doing it for various reasons. One of the reasons is that they would like to have a backup solution where they have customers, for example, in Australia. Then these customers, they can back up directly to one of the data centers in Australia instead of transporting all the data to Denmark. But also the benefits of object storage with the capacity and pay-as-you-grow and all these mechanisms. A different use case, that is a company called AnyCloud. They are doing archiving as a service. They primarily target advertising agencies, media customers, and so forth. Companies that are handling a lot of pictures and images. So what they're doing is that they are doing archiving as a service to our cloud. They utilize at the moment Frankfurt data center, and they are adding picture tagging as a service. So they are utilizing our Watson services on top of this object storage solution. So the customers, they can now write, if an advertising agency are looking for a red car, they can write red car in the content repository, and they can find all the previous tasks they have done for customers with red cars. So it really makes the solutions intelligent. Another use case is a company called Danmon, also a service provider, also operates in Norway actually. They are almost doing the same but with videos instead. So they are working within the broadcaster industry, selling to the large broadcasters in Norway and also in Scandinavia. So they have now built a service so where the broadcasters, they can actually upload all of their video content in a secure and cost-effective storage solution in the cloud or on premise, and then it can actually meta tag all of the video content that they have in the solution. So when they are talking to broadcasters that are preparing a news session, then they can write specific information about, the same with the pictures basically, the Queen, birthday and so forth, and then they will see all the videos that they may have in the library with the video and the Queen. And the big differentiator is really that this is all automated. Today they have to do all this manually. So they have built this service on IBM Cloud Object Storage as well. One of the unique features about the offering that we have from IBM is that the variety of offerings actually. That is, we have the public and the dedicated cloud. So the public cloud is the one, as you know, where you share your data, as other cloud providers they have. But we also have a dedicated cloud, so you actually have your own servers with storage on, and you can look up the security number and everything on the storage device. That is where we compete with the traditional vendors you see in the cloud. Some of them that also had an outage a couple of months ago. And then we have a private local cloud, what you also call on-premise. So you can buy the software only, and you can bring your own hardware. So we have support for Lenovo, HP, Ericsson. They produce servers actually. So a lot of different server vendors with disks then. You can use them and then just acquire the software. We have some of the really large customers that we have service providers. We have service providers that have more than an exabyte of data. They really fancy that they only need to have a software agreement, and then they can actually choose their own hardware. They can buy different hardware windows for every month if they want to do that. So we do kind of reverse auction on that. And then of course we have the hybrid cloud. So if you are in a financial institution where you need to have some of your data on premise, but you're okay to have other parts of the data in the cloud, then we have a hybrid solution with the same interface and everything. And this is really unique compared to the other vendors in the market. If you choose to go with the cloud, we have a global presence with a global reach. So that is like second to none. And especially in Europe, we have a large presence. And we, as you all know, we have a data center as well in Oslo. In terms of pricing, I just wanted to show you guys a business case over a 3-year period with 100 terabytes, which a lot of customers they have in unstructured content. So I wanted to do the comparison between our competitors in the market. And this is only the cloud comparison, so not on premise. So this will be roughly in storage cost $66,000 with Microsoft Azure. And Amazon Web Services that will be a bit cheaper with 48,000, and the IBM Cloud that will be 44,000. This just to show, because normally when you want to propose the best solution, the leading technology on the market, it's not often that it often comes with a price tag. But in this case, it's actually the cheapest solution on the market, and I think that's really strong. It also shows that IBM really wants to go into this market space and own the space. And of course, we have these other solutions like a dedicated cross-region where you know exactly where your data is, so you can go down and pick your server if you want to do that. So one of the additional benefits that we have from IBM, that is IBM Watson. So I briefly crossed the use case of the Watson visual recognition. So in this case, this is a video that has been uploaded to IBM Cloud Object Storage, and then the Watson visual recognition has been applied afterwards. And this is a short video, I think it's 30 seconds or something like that. But it's a train driving through a forest, and a guy is paying with his wallet and picking out his wallet. And the solution is actually tagging everything it sees. So you can see here it sees the train 33 times and a viaduct 8 times. So it really outlines that it's not just a storage solution, it is a storage solution that is prepared to do a lot of business relevant tasks as well. So if I just want to sum up here in why you should go with IBM Cloud Object Storage and why it's so good compared to competition, it's a leading technology on the market. It's the only true hybrid solution on the market as well. There's no vendor login. It's not like the traditional way of acquiring storage. You don't have to buy an appliance. You can buy the software only and choose whatever hardware you want. You have direct integration with a hybrid model to the IBM Cloud. You can integrate to all of the IBM Watson services, and all of these services within the analytics and the Watson, that is unstructured content, 99% of it, and all of that is being embedded and included into integrating with the cost service. And then it's choice with consistency, because if you choose to start in the cloud or choose to start on premise, it's the same user experience, it's the same way you operate with your storage solution, and that is also unique. I know that some of you here, you are service providers, so I have chosen to bring a slide into that, but it could also be really relevant if you're a larger enterprise. So what we see in the service provider market is that you have various services, backup as a service, email archiving, file sharing, and various services. And what we also see what we learn is that you have different storage solutions to all of these services. And that is like a challenge that you need to maintain and learn about that. Another issue is that you have different levels of free capacity in these systems. So that also really is a challenge. When you're taking storage out of backup cycles, moving that to a video repository, you have extra capacity here, but you cannot use it over here because it's another technology. So what we're saying is that basically all this content is unstructured. So you can base that in a single repository, IBM Cloud Object Storage. And this is symbolized as a cloud, but you can also have it on-premise or a combination of an on-premise solution. And then if you're a service provider that only operates within backup as a service, you can actually start having email archiving as a service, file sharing as well, and you don't need to pay for it before the actual customer comes in and wants to pay for it. Then of course you can apply gold and diamond services, various on our different tiers. And lastly, you can choose to go with add-on services like you've seen with AnyCloud and Danmon they've done. So all the pictures and videos that you have inside of the repository, you can embrace it with Watson video tagging or picture tagging if you want to do that. And then of course, it's directly integrated to our Bluemix portfolio and IBM Cloud. So now you can, if you want to include weather services within your portfolio and offering, you have the applications directly here, and the object storage that is also in our Bluemix offering. In terms of new stuff, what have been happened and announced recently, There's actually a couple of things and also really relevant. What we used to have in the cloud, that was a standard and the Vault tier, so basically a fast and a slower tier. Also the price that was differentiated as well. And what we did was that we introduced a service called Cold Vault. So this was the cheapest on the market, also the one that I presented before compared to Amazon and Azure. And this is actually half the price of that price. So it's really cost effective. So what we see now is that customers, they want to move that large tape libraries into the cloud. And you can see here 1 petabyte, that is $6,400 per month in the Oslo data center. And that is including maintenance. This is basically storage as a service. So it's really, really interesting price point. Lastly, we introduced Flex. So that is if you are a customer that really don't know if your data is going to be active or going to be passive, then this is actually a tiering that we have into the cloud. So if you have frequent access data, then it will move up. Otherwise, it would move down to the Cold Vault. And it's priced really cost effective compared to the other tiers. Another announcement was that a new relationship with NetApp. So if you use AlphaVault, then you have the possibility to back up directly to the cloud, or also Cloud Object Storage on-premise. And the same with Veritas. That was also a new announcement that we did. So basically, we are improving our ecosystems that I mentioned with the use cases. That is what we are focusing on, doing business with partners and system integrators. And this is a good example. We have a lot of new announcements coming up with new partnerships, and that will be announced later this quarter. So Douglas, I think it's your time to show some things that this is actually real. We can actually show you something. It's not just PowerPoint.
Yes. Let me connect myself.
Har alle noe å drikke på? Ingen får noe å spise på grunn av brannen I Vestby. Har det sviktet fullstendig med tilflyten av frukt og sånne ting, men vi har kaffe og te, så hvis man ønsker å bruke anledningen nå til å fylle på, så...
So, thank you so much for coming here and spending time with us. Let me see if this works. Yeah. I know. So I was just about doing an installation, so while I was sitting here. So before I get started, how many of you have been listening to Cloud Object Storage before and have some kind of input around it or knowledge about it? So before I get started, do you have any questions around what Christian presented?
Is it true?
How good is it? No questions? Okay. If you have questions during my presentation, please feel free to ask them immediately. And I will try to answer them. So, let's go technical then. Just need to get that one working. So, I'm going to start really easy. If you want to build a highly reliable 1 petabyte system, how would you build that traditionally? I think you know the answer. You would probably build it with a RAID 6 system, taking 1.2, 1.25 petabytes over raw disk. And there you have the 1 petabyte system. Do you think it's highly reliable? Would you classify it as that? I don't think that most people will do that. So what do? You put an on-site mirror, and you have a mirrored system. And would you classify this as highly reliable? I think so. It's okay, but it doesn't survive everything, of course. What happens if your data center goes down? Poof, your data is not available there. So you put in a remote copy somewhere. Now you could say you have a really highly reliable 1 petabyte system. Couple of sites you can survive if Telia digs off the cables, for example. It never happens with Telenor, I know, but Telia does that. So how would we do it with IBM Cloud Object Storage? Let me talk about that. First, just want to make a conclusion here. We have 1 petabyte of usable storage, and we need 3.75 maybe of raw storage. So that's quite a lot of overhead. And you have to pay for that with lots of disk. You have to have many racks, you have to have lots of power, cooling, and so on. And most important, you need to have a lot of people managing this. It takes about 3 people to manage this kind of system with traditional file storage. And you need to buy some extra software, replication software, backup software. Do you agree with this picture? Do you recognize it? Do you have it at home? Or you're
Yes.
If you have it at home, I would be impressed. So, what do we do with Cloud Object Storage? Well, we would do it like this. We would put out, let's say, about 3 storage pods with 666 terabytes each, and combine that using the Cloud Object Storage technology to build a 1 petabyte system. We would only need about 2 petabytes raw storage, less with disks, less racks, less floor space. 2 important aspects. Cloud Object Storage is really easy to manage. I'm going to show you the user interface and show you a little bit about this in a demo. But it's really easy. And you don't need any extra software to build the replication. And basically, our customers configure and see this system as so reliable, so from a technical perspective, they don't do backups. They might do it from a business perspective, but not from a technical perspective. And if we have time, I can show you some calculations on the security and reliability as well. What we see and what our customers see is that they have about 60% less total cost of ownership compared to a traditional system. So this was a bit of the sales pitch. Let's move on. So how does a Cloud Object Storage system look? How do you build it together? Let's start at the top. We have a manager. Let's see if I can get this. Oh. Very good. We have a manager managing the system. It's something that sits there and monitors the system. You configure it, you partition it, and so on. But it's not an in-band function, it's an out-of-band function, so it doesn't need to be highly reliable in that sense. Next level, I think, is actually one of the most interesting levels. The accessor level is where you read and write your data. And these are web servers, basically. They work as web servers. You use HTTP REST protocol to talk to them. They behave like web servers. You send them a command, you get the result, and you send them another command, you get the result. And you can have as many accessors as you want in the system. So you can scale your performance, your bandwidth, your number of operations per second. You can scale that by adding or subtracting accessors. And as they are web servers, they can sit on your private network inside the firewall, but you can also put some on the outside which means that it's really easy to get to the data from the outside if you open up for that. So it's still a highly reliable and secure system, but you can open up and let some data be readable from the internet, for example. And then on the final layer, we have the storage layer. This is where we store what we call slices, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. You can deploy the storage nodes on a single site or on multiple sites. This is also where we define the pricing, because we price this in a very simple manner. We price it based on raw storage capacity there. That's the only price tag we have in this. So this might not sound like IBM, but so it's really simple. And this one has functionality which is really important. It rebuilds slices. This is the place where your data is kept healthy. It will rebuild slices, it will calculate checksums, it will ensure that you have full integrity of the data down there. If we drill down further, and I'm talking a lot about how it works when you have this on site. Drill down further and look into the system. The system is delivered effectively as an appliance. You take certified x86 servers, systems, and you apply the Cloud Object Storage software to it, which will take over the system and basically make it into an appliance that is built up on the bare metal. So we come out with the operating system and all the software. And we use a special pared down version of Debian to make this extremely secure. So once you install it, you will have the appliances. I have a problem with so. And you can run this on bare metal hardware, and you can run it virtually if you want to, especially for the development systems and test systems. But the benefit is that you don't need to run patch management, you don't need to worry about updates and things. Just install it and you run it, and then it can call home when it's time for some maintenance and so on. Any questions? Let's go a little bit further then. So how does it work? So we have some data here, and this can be any type of data. This platform is totally agnostic about the data you put into it. It doesn't care. It doesn't do any sort of alterations about the data. It doesn't care how you consume it. It's just a piece of object of unknown sort of entity. So you send it to the accessor, and the accessor will, well, let's take a picture here. The accessor will take a picture, but we will store a picture. So a picture comes down, or an object. Could be a really large object. Could be a 1 gig file, could be a movie, could be an image, and so on. When it comes down, streamed down to the accessor, it will be segmented into 4 meg chunks. Encrypted and moved out. There is the encryption. Encrypted and then divided into a number of slices. Now comes the magic. We use, the magic is that my mouse doesn't work unless I point to places. Then we use the erasure coding to create additional parity slices. I call it that because then it's easy for you to understand what it is. So in this case, we did 7 slices, and then we create another 5 parity slices. So if you want to compare it with RAID, it would be like a RAID 7 plus 5, maybe, for your understanding. The interesting thing about these 12 slices is that they contain pieces of the information that we then store into the different storage nodes. So each and every node will have a little piece of the information. And in order to read this, we need to read any of the 7 pieces from the storage nodes. So from a I would say security standpoint or a resiliency standpoint, do you know how many virtual copies of data you have down here? In a traditional system, you would have a primary, you would have a replica, and you would have a remote copy, so you would basically have 3 copies of your data. How many copies do you think you have here, virtually? You have close to 4 million. So there are 4 million ways that you can get the data back from here. Picking up any 7 slices, combining them, will form back the bit perfect data. And what does this 4 million mean? It means that you have a really, really high level of resilience and resistance to hardware problems. So we picked up the data, and the net result is, for example, that we can survive, and your data can survive and still be available, even though 5 different nodes are down, 5 disks are gone, or even in the situation that we lose a whole site. Your data is still there and readable. So we can configure this system in a number of different ways to cater for the level of resistance and how you want to design your data centers. And a couple of examples of this looks like this. I was talking about a 12 wide system. We're building a 1.71 overhead in that one. If we go to a wider system, like a 16 wide system, we can build a 1.6 overhead system. 24 width, we'll do 1.85. 32 width, we do 1.6 again. So you can see you can combine this or select how you want to build this system to reach the level of resilience and the level of reliability you want. Just to give you some idea on what we do ourselves. We deliver this on-premise. You can buy the hardware, you can buy software, and you can build it and run it in your own data centers. We also build it and run it in our data centers and sell it as a service. That's the Cloud Object Storage as a service. And when we do that, we deploy it like this. We have, when we run this, we call it cross-region. We have it in multiple data centers, so you can get the data even though you might lose a connection to London or Frankfurt. So we build a 24/12/15 system, which means that every piece of data that comes down is divided into 12 pieces and then encoded to 24 pieces and then stored here. The last number, the 15, I'll come back in detail to that, but basically that's how many nodes must be written for a successful write to be registered. We have this across 3 centers, so we have 8 servers in each. This means that our cross-region service for this can survive a data center outage. So if Frankfurt is down, I can read from London or Amsterdam. If Amsterdam is down, I can read from Frankfurt and London, and so on. We also have our systems available in single region sites. And then we do a little bit different. We do an 18/12/15 in single site. But actually, being IBM, being a bit cautious about our customers' data, we ourselves mirror these systems to a secondary site. We call it availability zones. Our London service is currently mirrored to Frankfurt, and our Frankfurt service is currently mirrored to London. And we're also going to build more single-site systems. Milano, Singapore. We're just waiting for the first happy customer so we can build the Oslo installation.
When
would you replicate from Oslo? That's something we decide on when we see, when we come to that. It's an interesting question. It might be beneficial to go to London. We don't get the data into EU, maybe, or it might be beneficial to go to Frankfurt. We don't know that. We haven't decided on that yet. This one, this cross region, is currently sitting in London, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam, but it will be changed to sit in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Milan, because we want to keep the data within EU. We don't know what's going to happen with London after Brexit. We don't know if they're going to take on the EU privacy rules, for example. I want to sort of understand how deep technology do you want to go in this forum here? Or can I just decide for myself?
Well, it depends on what you mean. If it's physical or logical, like how it interacts with databases or physical hardware.
That's an interesting. It doesn't sort of interact with databases in that sense. It's just a big bucket of storage. You throw objects to it.
Yes, but if you have any examples of how to integrate it with existing.
Absolutely. That is more like a demo. I'll show you a couple of things to do that. Let's talk a little bit about more about technology. What I have here is what we call the smart write. When we write the data, we try to write it to all the storage nodes, and when we reach the write threshold, we give back a write acknowledgement to the application, for example, which means that all the storage node doesn't have to be online all the time. And in fact, if you look at a really large system, you can be sure that there is always one disk down, or there is a node down, or it's a network cable down. So this system is built to operate even if there's a number of hardware errors underneath it. It's not built to work in the perfect environment. It's built to work in the real world environment where something is almost always broken. The management about this, we call it lazy management. And the thinking is this: if the disk breaks down, you don't need to rush down to the data center to change it. In fact, our customers with the larger installations, they go down once a week or every second week with a big box of new hard disks. And then they pop out a server, take out the faulty disks, put in the new ones, and they will be refreshed and so on. So that's the sort of, that's also a matter of economics, how you build economics in management. Let's go down a little bit. We talked about the IDA and the width. I'm going to see here. We have a couple of things which are interesting. We call it the read threshold. So how many pieces must we read to successfully create the data? We have a write threshold. How many pieces must we write to report a successful write back? I'm going to let you read the slides yourself, but these are two important things that determine the reliability figures for the system. Let's take a quick look at the architecture, how we put this into a real-world solution. We have the slide stores. Can deploy on x86 hardware. We have the accessors, also x86 or virtual. The accessors are stateless, and they communicate over TCP/IP, building a storage network. Then what we often do is we put in a global site balancing, load balancing, so that you expose one URL for the user, and that one will go down to the accessor / web server that is best suited. But we also do, if we have multiple site installations, we also do local load balancers like this. Load balancing could be really easy. It just could be a DNS round robin, or it can be some much more advanced things as well. And then we have a manager somewhere. As long as it has TCP/IP access, it can be deployed as a VM as well. So we have this available to build your own storage network in your own data centers. We have it available to build it as a hybrid solution where you have some servers in your own network and some servers in the cloud. And we have it in the cloud where you can get it as a public service with different levels of availability, but you can also get it as a dedicated service where you have your own servers in the cloud and run this. So we have lots of choices and freedom to select here. Let's look at security and encryption. That's an interesting thing. The operating system is Debian, so it's a Linux version. All the things are hardened according to NSA. Each appliance has a firewall, and we monitor everything with encrypted SNMP messages. We have authentication to data. Basic authentication, just username, password. Active Directory can be integrated. LDAP can be integrated. We can have a PKI. And we can use the sort of S3 standard access key, secret key to get to the data. And we also have Keystone and Swift authentication. So there are lots of ways to integrate this into the enterprise. It's really easy to get it to work in that sense. Encryption. Encryption is on by default, and you can select which type of encryption you want to have. But the encryption, there is no key management, so we manage all the keys internally. So you don't have to mess with that, so to speak. But basically, in our public services, everything goes in encrypted. You can't choose there. Then we have something called what we call an all or nothing package, and it's interesting from we take in the data, we do the 4 meg segments, we do some integrity checks, we encrypt it, and we create what we call an all or nothing package. This means that in order to recreate the data, you must have all the 7 slices. Why is that important? So 7 slices, creating 12, sorry. But why is this important to have this all or nothing? This is how we protect data at rest. It's encrypted and so on. If you look at the traditional way, if you sort of want to get at data, if you're a thief and want to steal data, you can go into one data center and take one set of disks, and you get to all the data on that set of disks. But if you take the IBM COS in this case, if you want to steal the data, and it's the same thing, sort of same thinking if you thinking about eavesdropping on the traffic as well. You need to, in this case, you need to get into 2 data centers, you need to get to 7 nodes, find the 7 correct disks, the 7 correct slices, piece that together, calculate it backwards, decrypt it, and then you get 4 megs of data. So it's extremely hard to get to data in that sense. And basically, normal customers don't even bother to do disk destruction if they change the disk. So you can save some money there as well. So that's another way. Same with eavesdropping. The traffic is impossible to capture and get to the data because you can get maybe 1 or 2 slices, but you can't get them. I don't think you can get them all. Scalability. When you build up a system, you build a device set, and we call that a storage pool. If you want to extend this This is really easy. You put in another device set and you extended the storage pool. And you have the vault on this both. The thing with this is that this is zero downtime adding capacity. You don't need to do anything. And as soon as the system sees the new hardware, it will balance all the data across the different nodes. Deployment, you deploy an access pool, and in the access pool you deploy a number of accessors, and the number of accessors will control the performance you're going to get on the front end. If you look at provisioning, we do this in vaults, like this. Vault 1, Vault 2, we take out an access pool, connect that to Vault 1 and 2. And this is one of the things that's very good for storage providers. You can provide another vault, Vault 3 there, and put up another access pool. And this is watertight barriers between them. So someone coming in on access pool 1 can't see the yellow vaults. Coming in on access pool 2 can't see the blue vaults. So this is how we build up multi-tenant things. You can get everything in provision. You can set quotas, and you can decide on the encryption if you want to have that on each and every vault. So, expanding capacity, buying more hardware, expand the vault. This is totally automatic. Add more accessors to get better performance. Can be added at any time and removed at any time. So I'm speeding up a bit because I want to go to some demo and show you some stuff. Let me see, data integrity. So in the system we have four agents that runs. The integrity agent that checks the integrity of each and every slice. We have a scanning agent that looks for missing slices if they go away or something. We have a rebuild agent that can rebuild data, and a synchronization agent if you do run mirroring for some reason. Sorry, there we go. We're scanning the namespaces all the time, but this is the really strong thing. Each and every slice store is cooperating and rebuilding the data if something goes wrong. Say that the disk crashes. He loses one of the disks in the set. What is immediately happening is that the slice store, the storage node with the crash disk, will call out to his peers and ask them to help him rebuild the crashed data and send it to him, and he will put it on adjacent disks. So he has all the data there. And when you come out there a week later to switch the disk, he will just move it from the temporary space to the standard space, so to speak, or standard place. And this rebuilder thing is what keeps the data healthy. We have some disk lifecycle management. We can look at the disk, how it works, and if it doesn't or it's on its way to fail, we can quarantine it. And then we use the rebuilder, of course, to recreate the data. Availability, a little bit about that. So, software-defined, hardware-aware. Sometimes the software needs to be updated. So this is how we do it in a zero downtime scenario. We just upgrade the manager, and the manager will then start to upgrade the accessors one at a time, making sure that it has enough capacity to service all the users. And when they are upgraded, we get the upgrade going down to each and every slice store. So this way we can do a full upgrade of the system even though we don't take anything out. Everyone who has been working with disk systems or storage systems knows about the dreaded forklift upgrade working across Christmas, where you put in a new system and you move all the data. So with the cloud object storage, this is history. You don't have to do it like that. So we have our system here, everything is fine. And we just bought some new, beautiful, really big servers to replace this. So what do? It's really simple. We just evacuate data one slice store at a time to the new slice stores. And when it's evacuated, you can take that one away. And this is happening while you're working. So on Monday, you get a new set of servers into your data centers. You plug them in, you configure them, and then you tell the system to move the data. 1 week later, you can come back and pull out the old hardware. And you don't have to work evenings or nights or anything like that. And everything will be working all the time. And if you look at the large services and servers we have, and sort of demands on this kind of data, it's not okay that it's down. It's not okay to have your remote control stop working. It's not okay to have your video service being down. And if you look at some of the large providers, it's not okay to not be able to deliver a website or images or whatever. So this is the sort of the new paradigm we're living in. It's not okay to even be down for a couple of seconds almost. So, let me start something totally different. Like this. I was getting really bad so this is better. So I wanted to start with this one, just to show you a little bit about how we calculate reliability. So take a normal system, and I'll do a 12, 6, 8 on 3 sites. And the reason for doing this is that I want to be able to read and write even though I would lose one site in order to have reasonable levels. So I'll do a 12, 6, 8 system, which means that when I write my data, I need to hit 8 servers. When I read my data, I need to get 6 pieces. So I have some overhead there. I have an overhead of 2, which is still not very expensive if you look at the comparisons. I want to have a capacity of, let's see, 300 terabytes. And I'm building this with rather small storage nodes. So I'll have 12 disks per storage node. And I go and I say, I'll do it with 10 terabyte drives. Here you have some figures. Drive annual failure rate. Everyone who knows their spinning disks know what this kind of numbers are. URE rate is about a bit drop on a disk. Rebuild rate for a disk, 15 megabytes. So, what kind of result do I have of this? Well, I built a rather large system. I could go with smaller disk drives. So, I built myself a system that giving me 720 terabytes. I could go like 6 terabyte drives here to get 432, for example, but we can work with a 10. And the system I built will have a permanent data reliability over here of 11 nines. go ask any of our competitors if they can deliver 11 nines in their disk systems or storage systems to you. And if they can calculate it and give you a calculation. I can show you all the different algorithms we use here. 11 nines. That equals some 935 billion years mean time to data loss. That's rather okay, I think. If we look at it from a data center perspective, I do 3 data centers here. I say that my average site downtime is 5 minutes, and I get a site goes down every 90 days. So Telia is out there digging off the cables once a quarter. Node downtime is 60 minutes. Mean time to node outage, 90 days. So a node goes down every 90 days. Where actually in the calculation is that any node goes down 4 times a year, basically. Or all the nodes goes down 4 times a year, but not at the same time, of course. So this is my calculation. So from a data center perspective, from an application or user perspective, I'm delivering 8 nines of data availability on read. So my calculated annual downtime for reading the data is 0.2 seconds. No one's going to notice. And my calculated data availability on writes are 4 nines. So 376 seconds per year is the calculated time I won't be able to write to this. There is not many storage vendors who can give this kind of number to you.
What do I have to pay for it?
This one is really cheap. How do you want me to? This system, I would say maybe 12-15 öre per gigabyte per month. We're talking about highly reliable system to meet sort of the new storage paradigm. You can't afford this kind of stuff if you need to pay a krona or something like that. You need to have these low prices. The prices we deliver this to from our public network is, I think in Oslo, what do we say? 1.34 cents, US dollar cents per gig per month. That's what we deliver it for out of our data.
930 öre per gig per månad.
Exactly.
Does it also calculate the price?
This one?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. I can calculate the price for public costs in other ways, but this one is this is purely a technical reliability calculation. I am working. I have a selection box here for the servers, but I haven't had time to implement it all the way down to a price. But Christian will be happy to calculate the price quicker than you can say.
But I can't do basic like you.
No.
Do you also have a calculation if you use flash disks?
We actually don't support flash disks. We will, but we don't think the technology is low cost enough.
No, with the reliability you have, I totally understand that.
But we do have some good flash disks in the company.
Yeah.
So we are planning to go and support that. But right now, we don't. There's lots of things happening on the disk thing. They're still developing, like the SMR disks, for example. That's an interesting technology. So I wanted to show you.
What do you mean when you say drive capacity in terabytes? 10
terabytes? Each and every drive has that. So in this system we have like 122 drives. To build this up.
could you build the same reliability if you only use one site? So Oslo for the future as an example.
I can't get this because if someone digs off the cable to the one site, then the one site is done. So, but let's see where. There we go. If I do one site here, if I do this for Oslo, for example, you can see that I get 4 nines and a calculated downtime of 1,200 seconds approximately, which is still
as a second site.
So that's 20 minutes a year calculated downtime, which is still very short. The interesting thing is who can I mean, this is kind of calculation that we actually can give to our customers and show them what they're. I don't think, to be honest, I don't see that we can write this into a contract and like rather than saying you're going to get 11 nines, because there are so many things that goes in that is unknowns. I mean, how do people manage their data center? What is the power stuff? And there's so many unknowns. That's why you can't really write it. Yes.
Another question about the annual downtime. Am I reading wrong, or does it say 1217 seconds?
Yes, it's a.
So around 200 minutes?
20 minutes.
On one side.
60. Yeah, sorry. 20 minutes.
On a single site installation. If we look at what we do with our single sites, I mean, we mirror them in the background. So.
Why do you do that, and why don't you use reliability? I mean,
to be honest, I think we do that because we are IBM. We are handling customers' data, so we don't ever want to.
But could you use the standard way of reliability in the? I'm using 2 sites anyway without mirroring. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but the reason we use mirroring is actually because we are handling custom data. From a normal perspective, I would go with this. I wouldn't go with the mirroring. I wouldn't do this. But we're IBM, so we do it anyway. I don't even think that it was our intention to tell people that we're mirroring in the background. Because one of the things we do, or we don't do, we don't allow a customer to access their data on the mirror site. We just do this to keep
in the background, so to say.
Yeah, keep our data. There are probably ways to let the customer come. I mean, if you put it in Oslo and we mirror that to Frankfurt and Oslo blows up, of course we're going to let the customers get to the data if they're interested in it, so to speak. There might be more things blown up. So, okay, just for fun here, let's click this one, mirror, and see what happens. So we do this in a mirrored fashion. We do 100% permanent reliability, go to infinity because there's not enough nines in the calculation here. Mean time to data loss, infinity. Read data availability, 8 nines. Annual downtime, 0 seconds in both. So this is the kind of numbers we offer with it. So, how do you use this and sort of, how can a tool look like? I'm going to do a simple example. I'll use see this. So, I have a tool here called CyberDuck. That was actually already connected. So, let's disconnect that. This is it's a kind of a file browser tool, but it works towards just bookmarks. So I have my
demo site in London and a demo site in Frankfurt. This is actually our cross-region service, so it's the same data. I'll just click this one and open it, and I have some data up here. And I can look at it like this. If I double click it, it will download it like this. So very easy to use. I can actually also upload some data. Let me see, what can I can, let me do it like that. So I do the, I think I actually have. So I'll just upload the presentation I just held for you. It did go rather quickly, didn't it? So this system happens to understand what I'm doing. Okay, let's move on. What kind of other tools can I use? I just started a tool called Mountain Duck. It's from the same supplier as this CyberDuck. So, and it actually comes up and mounts the cloud object storage as a disk. So I'll connect again to the London Vault.
Does it use S3 in the background, or this is HTTP? But
it uses the S3 protocol on top of HTTP REST. So there you go. Oh, that was the wrong one. That's the one I wanted. Okay. So this one ended up on this. So here is the. Now I mounted the cloud object storage as a virtual disk. So now I can take a look at this. If I double click this one. Oh, I'm always on the wrong place. So here is my, just opened up my video. So I'm just streaming from our cloud object storage in London down to my workstation. So it's not a very fun movie, so I don't gonna pester you.
We have seen it.
Good. So this is some of the ways. I have about 10 minutes more. I'm going to show you a bit of the user interface. This is live demo, so everything can go wrong.
Would the customers use the GUI or some of the web products?
No, they would use a web GUI or an application, Spectrum Protect, where it does net backup, something like that. I just got one customer who used a NAS box from Synology and connected that, and it works now. So you can use lots of tools to do this. Let me see if I can.
And there's a lot of third-party file services also, so you can use traditional CIFS or NFS, like Cetera and all that.
Yeah, Cetera can, yeah, absolutely. There are many different solutions to use this. So let me. I'm this is actually for a very specific. I'll do an add exception, confirm. I'm gonna go down here. So I actually just called my own demo system on this machine that I was installing here a couple of minutes ago. Okay. So this system is not really ready to start. I have a couple of accessors and a couple of storage pools here. So I'll just have to, let's see, it's too big. So I do approval. Let me see. Okay. So it's just newly installed. It's not in perfect shape yet. Okay. So I'm gonna do something different. I can't really show you that much here when it's not in perfect shape. So I'll do a 8. What I'm doing now is that I'm calling up to the system that's up and running. This is running in USA. Oh, sorry. Like that. And this is a system where I don't have full rights, but I have enough to at least show you. So I can monitor this system. So this is our internal demo system, standing in Chicago right now, with 1 manager, 8 accessors, and a bunch of slice stores. I think it's 12. Could be more. 16 slice stores. And I can take a look and see how this system is behaving. Let's go down and look at a slice store, for example. I click on it and I can see the device health here. All the 12 disks are green, so everything is okay. I can see that I have raw capacity is 36 terabytes in this one, so it's a rather small system. And I have used about 5 terabytes of that. So down here I can follow up and see the different performance of this system. Can go straight in and see how the system is feeling, how the performance is, how the network I/O is, how it's working with rebuilding. You can see it's rather healthy actually. This is if it's helping some of its colleagues, slice-store colleagues, to rebuild, or if it needs some help with rebuilding. So actually in this case, it has sent out stuff to the other slice stores and asked for help with rebuilding something. So this is a live system that we can look at, or I can look at and work with. And if I take this one up again, and I go down here, I do a disconnect. I do a connect. And I'm gonna open up this system. And I don't have the secret key. Guess. Yeah, it's too long to guess. I will. Let me see. Demo Vault in US. unlucky. Murphy was here. Sorry. So I'll stop. So this is where I stopped. Do you have any questions? Anything specific that you would like to know more about?
Does it support time travel? Like you can go back for, say a customer deletes some data which he wants to revert to a state 2 hours ago?
Objects doesn't really work like that. But what you can enable versioning, which means that any changes or updates or new writes of an object will create a version.
How about deletes?
If you delete all the versions of an object.
Yeah, but if a customer deletes a video and he wasn't supposed to delete it,
then it's gone.
Okay.
But you can get it versioned. So it depends on. But if you delete all the versions of the video, your single version, then it's gone. So what you can do is that you can turn on delete protection, which means that a normal user is allowed to write and read, but not delete.
But it has no point-in-time recovery like databases have?
No.
Well, that's the application that handles that.
Yeah.
For example, internally we use the bug service for all our syncing of the files. And I have a file that I use a lot, and I have like 12,000 versions of that file. So when I delete it, I can go back 12,000 times and find the version that I want. So it's the application that you want to use together with object storage.
Yeah. So it doesn't have this kind of things with snapshots and those things.
You have to design your application.
You have to
around
design
it.
your application for that.
You enable the right features and then the application can work with that.
Yes. I mean, versioning is...
It's not a backup tool. It's an object storage.
Yes, in that sense.
Yeah, but you can say that about a database too. It's not a backup tool, but essentially it has your data.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we can turn off the deletes, for example. So you have to be the vault owner to do a delete, for example. So you can control that. It's all about sort of risk and management and all these kind of things. But you can stop the ordinary user from doing stupid things, so to speak. One of the uses we have with a tool called Cetera, which is a file sync and share, is protection for ransomware. So it can go in and use together with Cloud Object Storage, so that if a user, or when a user gets hit by ransomware, and everything gets encrypted, there are original files in their Cloud Object Storage, so they don't have to pay the ransom to get the data back. It's a pretty common scenario that people are asking for. I don't know how you see it in Norway. You never hear much about people who happen to get attacked by ransomware. But you read about it. You read about this hospital in the US, for example, where they went in and did ransomware on 100 servers in the hospital. They paid. So that kind of breakdown. So with this, I wanted to sort of thank you.
Can you enable warm, for example?
Almost. There is a new version coming out. It's due any day. We have the training this evening.
So then you have the protection you need to write new.
Yeah, in that sense, yes. On the other hand, warm feature will keep your data for 7 years, so you can't delete it for 7 years, for example, if you set that one period.
That's good for IBM.
It is absolutely good for IBM. I showed you how easy it is to have a software that mounts it as a disk. We also have this in a more, I would say, scale-out solutions. We can offer both NFS and CIFS interfaces built on hardware. If you want to have high performance or say high capacity file systems using the object storage, but it's still objects underneath. It's not files in that sense. So you can't go in and do an update of the third byte in a file and so on. That would result in a new object. But it's very good for old applications and you want to take use of the object technology. Yes, a question.
Is it correct that it's 100% compatible with S3 API from Amazon? So any application that is compatible with Amazon S3 APIs is compatible with IBM Cloud Object Store?
It's almost like I didn't pay for that question because it's not 100% compatible. There are functionality in S3, for example, hierarchical management. You can tell an object to go to Glacier in S3. You can't do that in Cloud Object Storage. It wouldn't know where to go, for example. There is an object size limit in Amazon, which we don't have. So it's not 100% compatible in that sense. But all the normal things, all the standard things, a lot of the abnormal things also work, but not 100%. And it's well documented it doesn't work.
So S3 interface, Swift interface as well?
This one has a Swift interface, yes.
Okay, so S3 and Swift and CIFS and NFS.
Yeah.
Any other interfaces that?
Yes, now I paid it. It has a simple object interface, which is extremely similar to the old Centera interface, if you know that, EMC Centera, where you throw in an object and you get a number back. And there is no more intelligence than that. Without that ticket number, you're toast if you can't get to the object. With S3, you can read the metadata and find an object anywhere. But that old interface, that was the first interface that was built. It's hardly ever used today.
The DSNet?
Pardon?
Is that called DSNet?
No, it's called Simple Object. It's really simple. It can't do basically anything. But read and write data and delete it. So, I wanted to... I was going to show you some more stuff in here, but I have to go into this one. So I don't get to do much in the US. On the maintenance tab, there's where I can run reports and get lots of information out of the system. And I can monitor this. My local system doesn't really want to play with me. There we go. Oh. Well, I can show you a bit. Monitoring, you saw. My system is almost up and running, complete. Configuration, where I create storage pools, access pools, sites. I create vaults. Security is important here, where I create users or I connect to my LDAP store. I enable password authentication. I have maintenance, where I can do different things like upgrade, troubleshooting console, and administration. So it's really simple to use. Anything available on these menus are also available as APIs, so you can really easy integrate it into your own portal software or your own management package. So I'm going to stop here because I'm feeling I'm talking on overtime almost. More questions?
More paid questions. Christian,
Yeah.
how difficult is it for them to get going? How do you start?
That depends.
Because they would like to try this in
yeah.
20 minutes.
In terms of the demo and POC, if you want to do it in the cloud, it's quite easy. We have a free tier that you can start using free of charge. What is it up to? Is it up to 20 gigs or something?
25 gigs.
25 gigs. It's in our data center in the States. And if you want to start on premise, I believe we still suggest that you can borrow the software and then install it in VMs to try and test it. So that's like the two ways. I believe that the cloud, that would be the easiest way. Then you can start in 10 minutes if you want to do that. But feel free to reach out to Douglas and I. We will be happy to show you guys and help.
Yeah, it is really easy to start using. But you need to have a little bit more powerful box than I have if you want to use it. If you right now I'm getting my system up and running. You can see the memory pressure on my machine. It doesn't really want to wake up.
But if you run it on VMs and have a normal server, it works quite well to have a local test for a functionality.
Absolutely. I have just over-configured it and using a bit too much memory on some other things there. So it's sort of, now you can see here my VMs and all the other stuff. So maybe it will start if I turn off lots of other things.
But what we have seen with the current customers that are rolling into the environment, both on premise and in the cloud, it's for the use cases that we already use today. So that would be like for archive and backup, backend. That is some of the most common use cases that we've seen so far. And then of course also with the Watson services that we talked about. But replacing a large tape library or something like that, that would be a really, really good and interesting use case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't talked so much about Spectrum Protect or those kind of things, but Spectrum Protect of course supports this. And with the latest functions, there is really easy to harvest the tape libraries and move them to cloud. Or to move them into different data centers. Yes. Thank you, Björn.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we close? And I think I say thank you for attending this seminar with a day's notice. We have actually recorded all of it, so if you would like to replay some of it or let any colleagues see, it will be available on Ustream. So thank you so much for attending. We'll be available for a few minutes more if anyone would like to have a one-on-one with Christian and Douglas.
Absolutely.
Thank you.